Okay, so our second example, there was a time in our lives when we went from being fairly well off in the historic district in Annapolis, Maryland, living in a nice 3-story historic building house. And we went from fairly well-to-do to poor overnight, just bang, just like that. We ended up in a tar paper shack on the side of a mountain in the Poconos in Pennsylvania. Previously, we'd attended an affluent Washington, D.C. church and were drawn into the circle with the pastor and the pastor's wife. They were fond of us, and they were very, very good to us. Very good people. He was educated at Oxford, and they were spirit-filled and very loving people. Really very special. But when we went from that condition, that social status or that income bracket, into being poor, and we moved away to a different area, when we walked into church with our 4 children, we drew some amazing stares, and the coldness and the rejection and the suspiciousness of people and of us was amazing. It just totally floored me. And I look back at it and I say, well, doing without the nice things in life like hot water, doing without that and shopping in thrift stores and so on, that's no big deal. But the social stigma that's attached to that, the way that people treat you, the opportunities that they close the door on to minister, the way that they judge you, that's a whole different matter. It's like all of a sudden you've gone from being someone who could do something in the church and make a contribution and be helpful to someone who's utterly worthless. I mean, after all, you're not a success. If you were a success, then you'd be dressed successfully. And so if you're not a success, well, we shouldn't hand over the ministry type jobs to you because you obviously don't measure up. Now, this is universal. I mean, we can deny it, we can say it doesn't exist, but it does. And it's very painful. It's so terribly painful. And not only are we discriminated against in those situations, but our children are discriminated against. And we just aren't worthy of the opportunities that the wealthier class in the church get. I think of Proverbs 13:7. One man pretends to be rich, yet has nothing. Another pretends to be poor, yet has great wealth. I have to tell you that when we made this move, our spiritual life exploded in depth and in comprehension, in unity with the Lord, in His priorities, in our love for Him, in teaching our children. Our lives just went overnight. They went from being superficially engaged in all the trappings of a well-heeled middle-class family to focusing almost exclusively on the Lord, on integrity and virtue, on loving Him, on worshiping Him, on learning about Him. Our lives changed overnight. So I love this scripture. One man pretends to be rich, yet he has nothing. I mean, we had running water when it rained. That's the kind of situation we were in. We had to borrow a chainsaw to get wood to stay warm for the winter. And another pretends to be poor, yet has great wealth. So one man pretends to be rich. When we were in Annapolis, we pretended to be rich. We had all of these things that kept us so busy, getting the house properly manicured and properly put in properly decorated, and getting the right clothing and the right accessories for the right clothing, and just all the trappings of living. We were just going in a merry-go-round. I have to remember, Keith Green had a magazine cover. You may not have seen it, but if you did, it's kind of hard to forget. They're very famous for their artwork. It was a woman standing in a kitchen, a yellow kitchen and a classic kitchen, and she was like, in a swirl of water, like she was getting flushed, like whoosh, in the kitchen. It was just spinning around her, and it was swallowing her. That's how we felt when we pretended to be rich. Another has nothing and pretends to be poor, yet has great wealth. How beautiful our life was at that time, how rich in the Lord it was. I'm convinced that this fear of rejection and not being given opportunities in ministry or in the church haunts a lot of Christians and even pastors, that they really feel obligated to keep up with what they look like, with the kinds of things they have, the kind of house they have, their cars. They feel that that's an important aspect of being a shepherd and being a leader, is to present a prosperous image. And that brings us to our next example. I don't think the Lord has anything against people who are wealthy and well-groomed. In fact, those are the people that He has chosen to manage the funding of missions and other endeavors for the church, for the spread of the gospel. And they are people with great integrity that He loves very much, that He can trust to do His will. Many of the wealthy are. And that's a beautiful thing. So we're not going to, we're not criticizing wealth or being well-groomed. What I know the Lord doesn't like is to judge people by the world's standards. That's what we're talking about here, is judging people's worth based on their economic status. He hates that. Okay, but what about pastors who have an eye to expansion of their churches and big, prosperous ministries and luxurious homes? Well, let's take a look at that for a minute. I've heard pastors talk about other pastors who were very wealthy and had a lot of money and incredibly, extraordinarily beautiful mansions. And I've heard them hold these people up as examples of how they want to be, and they want their Christian body to be, their church to be. And I think this is terrible, because what are we talking about here? We're talking about all these trappings of the world. We're not talking about anointing, holiness, personal holiness. We're not holding up those examples. We're holding up examples of money that has to do with the world. And that can get us into a lot of trouble. So let's say, for instance, there's a pastor of a small church, and he is very conscious of how he looks, how he dresses, and his appearance at church. At the same time, there's a single mother there who doesn't have a car. The pastor has saved money. He has a job on the side. He saved money so that he can go and spend $300, $400, $500 on clothing one weekend, because the things that he has are getting a little old. And a woman comes to the church who's a regular churchgoer. She's a single mother. Husband deserted her. She's got children. She has no car. No way to take the kids to the doctor. No way to go shopping. No way to take them on outings. She's in a really rough position, not having a car. And she finds a car for sale for a $500 down payment. And that's out of the question for her. She doesn't have that kind of money. So she goes to the pastor. Well, now, here the pastor is going to be confronted with a choice. Do I keep up with how I'm supposed to look, this successful, prosperous image? Or do I give this money to her and go on wearing frayed shirt collars and the same old suit to church, or suits to church? What am I going to do in that situation? Folks, we should never have to make that kind of a decision. That there should be that should be a non-existent threat in our lives as Christians. That should be totally irrelevant to us. Having to influence other people with our appearance to the point where we can't be very charitable with other people because we need that money to look good. Okay, So that's another example. I'll give you another example of a single mother at a conference. She's wanted to go to this conference for months because she heard about this teacher who was coming, a wonderful teacher. She goes to the conference. She finds a babysitting for her children. She has friends that watch her children. And she has a friend who pays for her ticket. And they go together. Well, she absolutely adores the teacher and would love to have some of the tapes and books that this teacher's written. So during the intermission, she goes out into the lobby and she looks at all the things that are being offered for sale. And everything is like, starts at $9.95 and goes up to $29.95, $59.95, $79.95. This woman is thinking about cough syrup for children. She can't go to Walgreens and buy cough syrup and have one of these teachings on CDs. And she walks away frustrated, hurt, and disappointed. Well, maybe she writes, writes to the teacher evangelist and asks if they would donate some materials to her. And she gets a letter back, a polite letter that says, "I'm sorry, we only do that for people who are in the mission field overseas." And the hard part about this is a particular teacher that we're talking about here, likes clothing, loves to go shopping, and talks about that pretty liberally along with her teachings. This is sad. This is just tragic that a woman should go without teachings like that. I mean, where are our priorities? Where are they at? Where we have such a need to appear in different clothes every time we go out to teach, where we have to spend large amounts of money on clothing. I mean, it's fine that they're probably, given to the Salvation Army when you're done with them, but what about those women who come to the conference who can't leave with the materials they need to extricate themselves out of a life of despair and poverty and depression? And she doesn't have a computer, so she can't go online and get some of these teachings. She's lucky if she has a CD player that works. This is another way that this whole culture of prosperity affects the little people and affects their children. Generations, we're talking about generations, are going to be affected by this. Well, I want to quote 1 John 2:15, "Do not love the world or anything in the world. If anyone loves the world, love for the Father is not in them. For everything in the world, the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life, comes not from the Father, but from the world. And the world and its desires pass away." Goodbye, they're gone. "But whoever does the will of God lives forever." Now, I'm going to talk about someone like that in just a few moments, so don't get discouraged with negative examples. I'm just trying to draw our attention to the ways that we really have cheated ourselves out of grace and cheated others out of grace by putting such a high priority on these superficial things.